Magnus Carlsen is on the verge of reaching the finals of the World Cup, as in yesterday's game. In the first game of the semi-final, he managed to win a very wild game against Nijat Abasov. But it should be said that he was very lucky at some point, and the Azeri local star had a big chance to win the game. This time, Nijat Abasov, playing with the white pieces, needs to play for a win in order to force a tiebreak. But we will see if it will become a tiebreak or Magnus Carlsen will reach the final for the first time in his career. Let's have a look. Abasov starts with the move 1d4, and like in many of his other games this event, he opts for the very solid and reliable London system with the bishop coming out to f4. He played it in his match against Fidit in the quarterfinals. In that game, Black played the move c5, but bishop f5 is a more solid continuation by Magnus Carlsen, who, of course, can be satisfied if it will be a draw. So aiming for a symmetrical position is not a bad strategy at all. White goes e3, e6, knight bd2, knight bd7. And now white is the first one to try to break the symmetry here with the move c4. Putting pressure in the center. There are ideas to take on d5. Sometimes you can get your queen out to b3. And Magnus says, well, I'm just going to take on c4. Very solid move. Usually you're waiting for the bishop to make a move first. So let's say white had played the move bishop e2 or bishop d3. Then white will have wasted the tempo after recapturing on c4. Now the bishop can capture in one go. But the question is whether it really matters in such a positional solid game. Black goes bishop d6, offering the exchange of bishops, and if white's gonna take, you just recapture with the c-pawn, restoring the symmetry, and Abasov says, well, I'm gonna play here the move knight e5. That's a real serious attempt to get a real game. Of course, knight takes e5 would be a huge blunder on account of d takes e5 and your knight on f6 and your bishop on d6 are hanging. If you take with the bishop instead, there is d takes e5 and your knight is under threat. White has a doubled pawn, but has the bishop pair. And if the knight comes to the center, let's say you go bishop g3, there are ideas to play for the initiative with e4 coming very soon. So Magnus is not interested in this business and plays a solid move. Goes for the move knight e4. Further aiming for new simplifications. Of course, after knight takes e4, the bishop will recapture. That's okay for black. But there follow the move f3. Knight takes d2, queen takes d2, and black plays f6. Just clarifying the situation in the center. The knight is under threat, decides to take on d7. Black recaptures with the queen, and it looks as if the position is pretty solid for black. But white plays e4, attacks the bishop, and the question is what to do with the bishop. There are sharp lines here. Starting with bishop takes f4, queen takes f4, when the bishop on f5 can be ignored by taking the pawn on d4. This must have been calculated by Abasov. Apparently things are pretty okay for black after queen takes c7. Queen protects the bishop, but black has to castle here. And if you do take the bishop on f5, the main resource here for black is the move rook f7 to deflect the queen from its defensive duty, supporting the bishop. Now after bishop takes e6, everything is pinned. The queen can't be taken, but there's queen e3. And after the king goes away, there's queen takes e6. That's a beautiful idea. Sacrificing your queen after f takes e6, rook takes c7. White is a pawn up, but this pawn will be regained very soon. Black is very active, so no problems here whatsoever. In the game, let's see what happened. And I think that Magnus probably even didn't calculate it. He went for the move bishop g6. He is not interested in these complications at this stage of the game. Drops back with the bishop. But that means that white has the possibility to play the move e5, which was not played by Abasov. But I think it's a really interesting move. When you're putting pressure against that bishop on d6, you're fixing the pawn on e6, which in the long run may become a potential target. I think there are ideas to play for an edge here as white, even though it's not much. Abasov played the move rook to d1, overprotecting the pawn on d4, so that after bishop takes, queen takes, this pawn is not hanging. Pawn on e6 is vulnerable. You would love to move your queen. So therefore first bishop f7 over protecting that pawn. And white goes king f2. No need to castle. You can place your king closer to the center, as further exchanges are probably to be expected. Queen c6, hitting the bishop. Bishop to b3 back. Queen b6, placing the queen in the diagonal of the white king. And even here, I would definitely suggest white to play the move e5. I like this move. It also gives up a bit of your flexibility with your nice pawn duo on e4 and d4, but it also fixes the pawn on e6. If you play f5, as otherwise e takes f6 will come, let's say f5, the queen can come back. And I don't like that bishop on f7. It's a very passive piece. It's not much for white, but if someone is better, it's definitely white. Queen e3 was played right away, but after castling queenside, the rook comes to the d-file with the idea to exert pressure against that d-pawn. Rook d2, rook d7, rook hd1, rook hd8. Both sides further reinforce their strengths, getting more pressure to the pawn on d4. It's still sufficiently defended. And now after the move bishop c4, there's not much else white can do. There are various playable continuations, but now black strikes with the move c5. I think it's a very nice move. You don't have to be afraid that you're opening up the files towards the black king. Main point is that after d takes c5, everything will be swapped on d2, after which queen takes c5 comes with check. It's a double attack. White is going to lose the bishop. So after c5, white went for the move d5. E takes d5, and question is how to recapture. I think bishop takes d5 is a solid continuation, but after bishop takes e takes, the pawn, it's well supported, but it's not really dangerous. The position is pretty balanced. Abasov decides to keep more pieces on the board. He's in a must-win situation. We should not forget that. He recaptures with the e-pawn right away, so the bishops stay on the board. But frankly speaking, I'm not sure this bishop on c4 is such a great piece. First, Magnus improved its king, making it a little bit safer on b8. White goes a3. Queen d6, so the rook will be brought into play very soon. Queen d6 with the idea to hit the pawn on h2. Rook e7 is about to be played, so white first goes g3. Now the rook hits the queen. Queen goes to c3, and it's not clear what white is going to do. White is just holding that pawn on d5 and see if black is going to undertake any action. h5 with the idea to go h4 and put some pressure against the white king. White goes b4, trying to put pressure there. h4 is played. Of course, g takes h4 is not very attractive on account of queen takes h2. b takes c5, queen takes c5. And now it's the move queen to d4. Offering the exchange of queens, and obviously taking the pawn on a3 is not recommendable here, because there are ideas like rook a1 to attack the queen, and after the queen moves away, the pawn on a7 hangs. So that is not something Magnus considered, obviously. In fact, he decided to take on g3, h takes g3, and what is a player like Magnus going to do here? A draw is okay for him. He likes the position very well, so he decides, let's just exchange queens. There's nothing wrong with it. If Magnus would have been in a must-win situation, I would not have been surprised if he had decided here to keep queens on the board. There's more play, there are more weaknesses in white's position than in black's. Potentially, the white king is also more vulnerable. So I think this would have been a better practical winning attempt. But let's see. He takes on d4. Rook recaptures. Rook c7. So the rook indirectly puts pressure against the bishop. White goes g4. And now the rook comes to c5. Maximizing the pressure against the pawn on d5 with both the rooks and the bishop. White goes a4. Bishop e8. Not really sure this is what white should have done. The pawn on a4 can potentially become a target. It's already now the case. So bishop goes back to b3 to support that pawn. Rook c3. Hitting the bishop. Rook 1 to d3. Rooks are coming off the board. And now with one pair of rooks being exchanged, it's easier for your king to be activated. So king comes into the game. King c7. Rook e3. bishop g6. Now the bishop comes alive. Something like rook e7 is absolutely not dangerous at all. Rook d7 is there and all the threats have been parried. Instead of rook e7, white played here the move g5. It's a nice idea to create some weaknesses on the king side. After fg5 there is rook to e5 with the idea to take on g5, after which the bishop on g6 is in trouble and the pawn on g7 is more vulnerable. Magnus instead goes for rook e8, aiming for further simplifications by offering the trade of rooks. gf6, gf6, rook e8, rook e8. It's a bishop endgame. Is this pawn an asset or a weakness? That's what we're gonna see. King to e3, a5. Fixing a pawn on the light square. That's not something white should be very happy with. King comes to d4, king d6, and black is totally safe here. White goes f4, bringing up the pawn, bishop to h5. And now king to e4, with the idea that if black is careless, let's say black goes king c5, there is king f5, and this pawn on f6 will be taken. White will create a passed pawn. That's something you should not allow. White is winning in that case. So bishop g4, preventing the white king from infiltrating, is a very good technical move. Bishop to c2, and now the king comes to c5. The king is active, but still in control of white's d-pawn. Bishop to b3 back, bishop h3, bishop c2. Both sides are making sort of waiting moves. Black is looking for the ideal setup. Bishop to d1, king to c4. The king can come further. Bishop e2 check, king back to c5, bishop to d1. And a human being would just settle for a draw here with the move king c4. But Magnus smells blood, believes that he is absolutely not risking anything. Goes for the move b6. Let's see what white is gonna do. White has two weaknesses to deal with, and white in his turn is not in the capacity to target any of black's pawns. Bishop to c2, king c4, bishop d3, king b4, bishop to c2 back. The bishop got to defend the pawn. And now, of course, the pawn on a4 cannot be taken. The bishops will be exchanged, and the d-pawn is really fast, is out of reach of the black king. So it's game over. White wins. Magnus doesn't fall for it. He goes for the move king c3, attacking the bishop. Bishop got to stay on the diagonal to keep the pawn defended. King c4, bishop e2 check, king b4, bishop back. King c3. And now white plays here the move d6. Wow, the king is really far away. So white is looking for an idea, probably to enter with the king on d5. And Magnus plays the critical move. He goes for the move king c4 back, so the king cannot enter. And now look what is happening. Abasov comes up with a very interesting resource. Played here the move bishop to g4, sacrificing the bishop, which is based on an interference motive. If you take the bishop, then the pawn comes to f5. The diagonal has been blocked now. White is about to play the move d7, and black cannot do anything about it. The d-pawn is too strong. That means that after bishop g4, black has to surrender the control over the d7 square. Moves the bishop first to c6 with check. The king goes back to e3. Bishop takes a4. And now the pawn comes to d7, threatening to get promoted. Bishop takes d7, bishop takes d7. All of a sudden we have a bishop endgame versus two pawns. Does white have any winning chances with that extra piece? Black played b5. The king got to come over to the queen side. b4, bishop e6 check. And now Carlsen had of course seen in advance that the king should stay close to the center so that can attack the pawn on f4. White will eventually have to put its pawn on f5. Black goes a4, king c2, king e4, bishop d7, attacking the pawn. But you're not really threatening to take it, because after king e5, the black king stays in touch with the pawn on f5. After bishop takes a4, white is running out of material. This is gonna be a draw. White is unable to deliver checkmate with the bishop only. So instead, white played here the move king d3, hoping to wrap up these two pawns. If that's possible, then of course the bishop can keep the pawn on f5 defended and white is winning. But now it's time to mobilize the a pawn, threatening to play a2. The king comes back. Black goes a2, threatening to promote the pawn, king b2. King is in charge of the pawns now, but there is this move b3. Of course, that pawn cannot be taken as black promotes its a-pawn. Black wins. Instead, bishop e6 played, but white unfortunately is not able to make any progress. After the move king e4, only thing white can do is take the pawn on b3. If you make a waiting move with the king, the black king can also make a waiting move. That's not a problem at all. After bishop takes b3, Magnus said, please take my pawn. King takes a1. King takes f5. White doesn't have enough material. And after bishop c2, king e5, king b1, f5. White captured on f5 over the draw, because after king takes f5, it's insufficient material. The game is over. And that means Magnus Carlsen is for the first time in his career in the, I wanted to say in the semi-final, but he is in the final of the World Cup. It is his dream. He has become multiple times world champion, but he has never been in the final of the World Cup. So let's see what he is going to do in that final. Either he's going to play with Pragnananda or with Caruana. That's going to be really exciting. I hope to see you there as well. And please help me to grow the channel by subscribe to this channel. I will really appreciate your support. And then I promise to cover all the exciting games played in the remaining part of the World Cup.